more formally. All right, Nathan, we good to go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome back. If you were on our DevX Tech webinar, we got a lot of feedback after that webinar that the principles seemed very cool and applicable, but there was a need for sort of diving into the product and seeing how these principles apply in real life. So today, we've basically designed a demo to walk through some administrative workflows, some standard access procedures, as well as how to configure some of the security controls. Nathan will nicely be guiding us through this experience. And I'm Cole. I run marketing at hoop.dev, and I'm going to kick it over to him to introduce himself.
Yeah, hey, my name is Nathan. I'm a staff sales engineer here at Hoop. So kind of the technical liaison for all things in go-to-market. Great to see you guys.
Awesome. So I think maybe we don't have a ton of time here to work with, so let's just sort of jump into the architecture, give everybody a sort of a lay of the land of, what Hoop is from 30,000 feet, and then we'll jump into the product.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen then. All right. So at a very high level, Hoop sits as a gateway between, on the left-hand side, we kind of have clients. That's going to be users, developers, agents, that kind of scope. And on the right side, database technologies, your infrastructure, et cetera. And so Hoop is going to actually make sure to integrate carefully with the gateway with things like secrets management, other sorts of provisioning tools, SSO, IDP, to make sure that the right users are able to access the right technologies without necessarily having to have maximum levels of credentialing, et cetera. So Hoop is going to operate at the protocol level. So parsing, redacting, governing things like individual SQL queries in real time, as opposed to just the traditional method of granting large time-bounded sessions with unlimited access. And our customers really like that we offer a lot of flexibility in the deployment model. So you can deploy Hoop as a self-hosted model, which is what most of our customers choose. Deploy inside your VPC, inside your data center, wherever that's going to be, such that this kind of traffic lives inside that VPN or lives inside your boundary, as opposed to going out to the public internet elsewhere. We do also offer a SaaS solution for teams who want a little bit less in the terms of management infrastructure, but typically our customers choose this kind of on-premise data model.
And to quickly call back to the DevXSec webinar, this was one of our, first principles was, hey, we got to have flexibility here. You got to be able to use your existing infrastructure when we are, trying to implement a piece of security that forces people to re-architect their entire stack. It's just not going to get used. So that's why, we have such flexible deployment models, integrate into different secrets managers. It's very important that this isn't just a one size fits one size solution. We want to make sure that everybody can use it.
Absolutely. So let's take a look at what the UI actually looks like here. So when I log into Hoop for the first time, and this is going to be for the perspective of like an administrative user. I'm going to show a little bit later what like an end user experience might look like. It's going to be a little bit more reduced compared to this. On the left-hand side panel, we have a traditional kind of, navigation. And so you can see things like resources. These are going to be those technologies on the right-hand side we talked about. Things like databases, things like infrastructure pieces, that kind of thing. We're also going to find things like the terminal where you can actually go ahead and, connect to these sorts of technologies. So what that looks like in Hoop, let's just kind of dive into it. I click into the terminal as a user, and I want to go ahead and run some queries. I use my drop down. I pick, MySQL read only. This is a connection. And now, because I have permission on this connection, I go ahead and I start running a query. Run, select star from users. I've gone ahead and queried to select all the users in this table. And because I have data redaction turned on, we're going to be redacting things like sensitive information. In this case, we're seeing emails are going to go ahead and get redacted. And so right off of the bat, as a user, I logged in. My SSO gave me credit for which roles I was able to access, and I'm already able to go ahead and access that data very quickly. This is nice, but like what we hear from our customers is they want to be able to access it natively, where it's going to actually be where they really are. If I want to go ahead, connect MySQL, I'm going to go ahead and run with the hoop CLI a one-line command here. And it's going to go ahead and run this hoop connection. And now I can go ahead and log into my dbeaver client. This is going to be that native client that as an engineer I'm comfortable typically using. And with that, if we look at the connection, we can see it's actually connecting via localhost. So via this proxy that I've just connected.
Nathan, I
And
think we might
now,
need to change the window that we're viewing here. I think we're still seeing terminal.
oh, sorry. Better now?
Perfect.
All right, sorry about that. Let me recap. So I ran Boop Connect, etc. in my terminal. This gave me my localhost permissions. I have credentials on this database from the gateway, but they're no longer actually exposed to me. So he says like no op user and password. I've plugged those into dbeaver and I've opened my connection. Now I can run select star from say a payments table. And I've gone ahead and this is my normal workflow, but now I have a diminished amount of access compared to what I used to have because, as I said, I've got no credentialing, that kind of thing here. So, when I term this connection, now it's been closed. I'm no longer able to use it. When I come back here into Hoop, when I go ahead and look at what I actually did in this connection, I'm able to see the full contents of what dbeaver was actually doing. That's a lot of querying for things like metadata and other sorts of content. But I can also see here I ran this select star from payments. And that's going to be really useful from an auditing perspective because I'm able to govern what my users are actually doing and what they're actually seeing while they're actually logged in.
And just to sort of, highlight some contrast here, I think, one thing that when it's when we talk to our customers about some of this stuff, it's accessing a production database can take weeks. You submit a ticket, it gets lost in the backlog, and it's, not necessarily prioritized. Depending on what it is you're trying to do, that could either be, inconsequential or extremely disastrous. And one of the beautiful things about data masking is, when you give these read-only profiles the ability to self-service access. So, what can take up to 30% of the SDLC can now be essentially automated in a few clicks. And the security controls, which again, previously you might have to rely on knowing schemas and manually updating policies are redacted on the fly. So you just select the data types that you want to redact, rules are configured in, I don't know, what do you think, like 25, 30 seconds? And all of a sudden, based off of people's roles, you can ensure that people are not seeing information that they're not supposed to see.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just kind of controlled down here in our AI data masking feature. Very adjacently to that, we want to make sure that not just people aren't able to see the data that they're not supposed to be seeing, we also want to make sure they're not able to access or block or update or otherwise, do things that we call, quote, forbidden, right? And so in this particular case, we're going to be looking at this example. I have a guardrail where I'm denying deletion without a where clause. I don't want my users able to like drop a table or block a whole bunch of things. And so when I switch over here into this other terminal window and MySQL RDS proof required, if I run this delete from users query, then it goes validation error, match guardrails input rule, type pattern match, and fits against the regex that I wrote, which says, hey, you're not allowed to delete any, delete without like a where clause. Now, on the other hand, if I actually, said where email equals, Nathan at hoop.dev, and actually go ahead and run this, then it completes successful, or rather, it passes the guardrail. And what that really looks like, it says this task needs to be reviewed. And we're going to integrate with best in breed approval workflow tooling. And here at Hoop, what we use instead of a more traditional tool like ServiceNow is we use Slack. And so that's gone ahead and pushed an actual notification over here into my approval user. Name Nathan test connection MySQL RDS approval required. Here's the script. Delete from users where email equals, etc. And I can go ahead and approve that. And now we've got this approval workflow, which took seconds, where traditionally it's taken minutes to hours with email and other sorts of workflows. and that kind of thing here. And so now that it's been approved, I can come back over here to sessions, delete. I see it's been approved, and I can hit execute. And it's going to go ahead and actually do that deletion. Now, in this particular case, this user didn't actually exist, but we can demonstrate that we've gone ahead and, run a query that was blocked because it didn't match the right pattern in the guardrail, and then gone ahead, restructured it to a point where it is approved, submitted it, it's been approved, and then we've gone ahead and actually executed that.
And this is something really interesting, or this was something really interesting to a customer like PicPay, for example, who congratulations to PicPay just IPO'd. They wanted a way to ensure that the changes requested that were approved were the changes that were actually executed. And so when traditionally you have a change request, production access is granted, you give a time bound approval. Someone can execute that exact change, but then they still have like 30 minutes, an hour, 4 hours, however long the just-in-time window is. And then, essentially whatever else they might want to do while they have production access, they have the window to execute. But that can create some compliance nightmares when you have to prove exactly what actions happened and what data was accessed. So the beautiful thing about this, we call it command level access, is instead of approving someone for 30 minutes or an hour, you're approving them for one action. And so nothing will execute against your resources that you haven't explicitly said, yes, this is good to go. So in terms of reliability, I mean, this is like an uptime daydream, except now it can be a part of, everyday workflows.
Yeah. I think maybe to, double down on this a little bit. One feature that our customers kind of came and asked, and they said, hey, we like this command level approval, um, but we want to be able to do things like pre-approved commands. How do we do that? And so in that capacity, we went ahead and we built this feature we call runbooks. And what this is basically a pre-approved set of queries. And I'm just going to run this example with the user ID 1, and it's going to kind of have pull back and give me this user. But like from your perspective now, the question I always hear is like, okay, but like what query actually ran? And now I come back over here uh into my sessions, and I can go ahead and see that the rest of the run book was parameter user ID 1, but the query actually was select star from users where the user ID equals the certain value. And, the DBAs I work with have come back and said things like, we're hearing a lot of update email address or other update user profile, a lot of these very basic repeated kinds of queries. And so with this feature of runbooks in Hoop, what we do is we check in these pre-approved scripts, and then we apply a different level of permissioning on the role. And what that looks like for this particular example is I have a connection to MySQL that can only be used in runbooks. It can't be used in the terminal. It can't be used natively, but because it's used in runbooks, it effectively is only able to be run against these pre-approved queries. And so the DBAs, the product owners go ahead and create these pre-approved tasks. They submit them in to GitHub or wherever you're going to check in, using like a infrastructure as code type model. And then their users can go ahead and kind of self-access in, again, like pre-approved command-based approvals. And that way you only have to go to escalation when you have one-off ad hoc, more rare commands, or you do need that rare 30-minute, 1 hour type window as well. And so now we're really democratizing access to make sure that people are wearing the right level of gloves when they deal with these very sensitive systems, and people are better, collaborating more effectively. There's even less of this kind of time blocking that happens when you have to sit there and wait for approvals, even less context switching, because you're just able to move in the ways that are approved and move in the ways that are known. No problem. You kind of get to that end result much, much faster.
Yeah, and I think a perfect example of this is like for a finance team that like really wouldn't need that much access, but say they have to run a few queries, and every time that they need access, they're pinging a DBA and saying like, "Hey, can you run this script for me, or can you identify this piece of information? I need this insight." And if you just, create a run book for it, they can go in. I'm not a particularly technical person. If you gave me a terminal and said, "All right, find out, the average deal size of this sector of customer," I would almost certainly knock over whatever database I'm interacting with, but I can fill out a form. And so I think this is it's a very simple way to remove not just the reliability concerns of someone going in without proper, knowledge to perform the action, but also to reduce the workload of those DBAs, as Nathan mentioned. They're not running scripts on behalf of teams that otherwise wouldn't have access.
Absolutely. Again, like the goal is really democratize access within reason. And so give people access to the tools they need to do their job and make sure that those tools are nicely packaged and the scope is correctly defined. In this way, each person is able to do their own job more effectively. The DBAs can focus on their actual hard jobs, such as like maintaining these large databases, making sure the infrastructure is reliable, as opposed to being interrupted, running one-off queries, getting back to it, because we all know that context switching can cost half an hour per task. You have to stop what you're doing, you have to put it aside, you have to boot up on the new thing, all the rest of that. And that time, like organizationally at scale, really, really adds up. And so the more that we can really buy back, we're buying back like development cycles, we're buying back reliability cycles, and we end up, one or two more releases per year, those kinds of things. Really, really big impact over time in terms of like generationally developing like the tech behind the backs your company.
And I think another perfect thing to sort of add to the back of that is, fundamentally, like what we do is secure data, ensure reliability, and grant access, which in some categories or in some use cases would make it seem like we're a security tool, and maybe we are, but some of our best ROI numbers are in productivity gains because of the ways that Hoop is able to make this traditionally clunky process very efficient. And then I think with that, I think, we have about 10 minutes left. We don't need to take all of it, but we would love to open things up for Q&A. Okay, anonymous attendee. Do you have any way to show ROI during a POC, for example? I mean, I
Yes,
think, yeah, Nathan, why don't you jump in first?
I would say the way that that typically kind of happens is you work with us, work with the sales team. Let's talk about what your current estate looks like. How like we do things like talk about and maybe interviews for with like, DBA, for example. How much time are you spending running these ad hoc queries? How often does this actually get asked to happen? And we kind of build out the current state of like what that time investment might look like, or other tooling, that kind of thing. And then we can work with that to produce this like before and after sort of plan. And that's one of the ways that historically we've worked with the customers to look at this kind of ROI. But every company is a little bit different and everyone's estate looks a little bit different. And so really the goal is to be good partners. And that's going to be between myself, Mike, Jack, some other folks in the sales team, and yourselves as a customer as we engage in this relationship.
Yeah, I used to work for an airplane company, and we used to have a saying, when you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. There's no like one size fits all, and pain can show up in any number of places depending on what is prioritized. So, for example, if developer velocity and security are both prioritized, then a lot of the time the pain can show up for platform. And they're, constantly, manually scripting access and removing access, and it becomes extremely cumbersome. And that wears on people. And so sometimes it's a developer happiness ROI. Sometimes it's consolidating access and data security spend into one budget item, and that's the ROI. Sometimes it's productivity. It depends on how your company works and how your engineering organization works. And I'd love to jump more into that. We do have another question here. Could you explain more on how hoop.dev helps in data security, encryption, masking, and what happens when
Yeah,
insert and update commands?
yeah, totally fair. So high level, let me get my architecture slide back up here. No, yeah, one second.
I think another question that could feed nicely into this is another anonymous attendee. Sorry if I missed this. Did you touch upon setup? How long does it
Yeah,
take / how
great.
complex?
We'll touch both these questions together. Okay. So how encryption, masking, insert update commands kind of work, right? So as the data flows from the client, remember we have clients like my dbeaver, and we have end service like the database. And so as my client request flows through the gateway, it flows through a guardrailing data masking layer. And one of the pieces of technology we're using a number of open source models. But for example, this is something like a Microsoft Presidio is a part of this architecture. And so as those commands and the data flows through, it's running against the list of for example, regex screens or other blocking or redaction type features. And so as those guardrails get broken, or if they were triggered, it truncates the command. And so it's going to send back a signal and says, hey, I showed this earlier in the demo, hey, guardrail was broken, and it's not going to forward that command back through to the rest of the system. So it happens before execution. Redaction is a little bit different. That happens, execute the query, and then as the data is coming back, then we're running through the redaction models to do the trimming or replacing in place. And that's what you saw the like xxxxx at gmail.com, for example. That's kind of how that actually works more broadly across the platform. And for setup, everything is nicely Dockerized and containerized. And so there's a couple one-line installation scripts on our website, hoop.dev/docs. And you provision a box, and then there's some details around sizing. And then you stand up the gateway, and with that gateway stands up the guardrailing AI masking features. And, that's going to actually go ahead and ship that piece back together in one step. I hope that answers the question.
All right, and then we have one last question. It has to do with run books. We didn't really touch on this too much during the demo. I mean, we I guess we did a little bit of a dive into it, but a lot of potential use cases. Can you speak to a few customers that are using this today? Answer that one live as well.
Yeah. So, I have a customer, for example, who is using runbooks to allow like customer success managers to go ahead and like update contact information, right? And so there's a lot of, groups who are using like support agents or excuse me, whose people in the support organization often have to do some pretty low level basic queries against databases, right? Again, like update payment information if that's how your system is going to work. And so this way we can actually structure some queries like update credit card information to be a certain pattern where an email is a certain place. And that way you prefab this box, this run book. And when you do that, then you can give them the ability to run this update script ad hoc without necessarily needing approval, because we're not actually giving them any information to run any select or delete or anything else against this live database, which is very, very sensitive data in this particular case. I think that's a pretty good primary example. Cole, anything else come top of mind for you?
I was just thinking that, some people will use it to restart a pod. Like I have seen again, this is a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but I've seen some pretty creative run books. I think this is like one thing that, as people are running commands repeatedly, whether it's against databases or other infrastructure, these commands can essentially be, noted like, okay, this is coming up more and more. And instead of requiring, full escalation to incident response, like you can create run books that will perform some of the more basic functions of incident response and get you back online faster. All right, we are at 128, and I've only allotted 2 more minutes. So if anyone has any other questions, I did also anecdotally, I was thinking about the setup question. And it just sort of seems perfect to bring up, but we have a not yet a customer, but a prospect who was talking about setting up Hoop and was able to get a production instance essentially protected within 45 minutes. So if you have any doubt about like how quick is this thing to set up and how challenging is it, that rest assured, like it's a lot faster than anything else in this space, that's for sure. All right, seems like we are pretty much at time here. Are there any final questions? Great. Well, if you're curious about what we've touched on today and you want to try it for yourself, there's an open source version online, and you can give that a go. We also have if you're an enterprise, if you represent an enterprise and you want to try out the product for your team, you can also reach out to sales through the website. We'd be happy to spin up a key and give you access. And yeah, I hope this was informational. I hope you got to see some of the principles that we talked about in November in practice. And if this is your first experience with Hoop and you're interested, feel free to follow up any way that feels natural. You can reach us all on LinkedIn, on email, and we look forward to hearing from you guys. And thank you, Nathan, for the work.
Of course. Thanks everyone for joining.
Bye.